And greetings, welcome to the Evidence and Reasons for the Christian Faith video channel. I'm your host, Salvador Cordova. This is going to be a relatively brief show. Someone I've been following for a long time, Anton Zeilinger. I'd been in my journey toward intelligent design. I had been exploring evidence of God in quantum mechanics. Although I believe one cannot absolutely prove that God exists even through quantum mechanics or anything else, it makes something feasible. So people have said, and greetings, Paleologos, people have said God is outside of science. Well, the issue is when we have evidence of miracles, albeit indirect, like say the origin of life, at what point do we start to invoke miracles? If quantum mechanics, a certain interpretation of it, leads us to conclude that there is an ultimate God or being, and this is totally outside of theology, then I would say it starts to become reasonable to invoke miracles and intelligent design and a creator in the past, purely on just the study of evidence, some sort of a priori reasoning saying that the laws of physics always have to be obeyed. That's been kind of violated in cosmology so many times over, it's unbelievable. And abiogenesis and evolutionary theory, though they pretend they don't need miracles to make their theory work, as we study the violation of ordinary expectation, it's so many sigmas from expectation, some of the things that we see. At what point do we start to invoke miracles as a cause? Now, Anton Zeilinger was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics for his pioneering work in quantum mechanics, particularly quantum information theory. So some of the experiments are really just too strange, like quantum teleportation. He was famous for quantum teleportation. I don't completely understand it, but why don't I read what he had to say? And maybe I'll revisit this later. There was the passing. This happened during the passing of John Archibald Wheeler. Around that time, or maybe shortly before. Wheeler, I believe, lived a very long life. His students were Nobel Prize winners, and one of his students was Frank Tipler, who was an atheist, became a Christian. That's not a well-known story. Tipler's studies of physics led him to believe that the existence of God. So why don't I show what Zeilinger has said, and maybe I may or may not read the whole essay, but why don't I at least read the paragraph in question? We'll just see how much time we have for this. So, Science and Ultimate Reality, celebrating the vision of John Archibald Wheeler and taking it forward into a new century of discovery. Why the quantum, it from bit, a participatory universe, three far-reaching visionary questions from John Archibald Wheeler and how they inspired a quantum experimentalist. And Zeilinger is a quantum experimentalist. Let me just make this even a little bigger. So why don't I read the last paragraph? In conclusion, it may very well be said that information is the irreducible kernel from which everything else flows. The question why nature appears quantized is simply a consequence of the fact that information itself is quantized by necessity. It might even be fair to observe that the concept of information is fundamental, is very old knowledge of humanity. Witness, for example, the beginning of the Gospel according to John. In the beginning was the Word. Why don't I just read a little bit of that passage? John 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. I'm sorry. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. In the beginning was the Word, and the Greek word for that is logos, from where we derive the word logic. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. It is verses like this that had motivated what we call the Trinitarian view, that God exists in three persons, but there's only one God. C.S. Lewis actually had a very good essay on the Trinity. So now going back to Zeilinger, forgive me for mispronouncing his name. In conclusion, it may very well be said that information is the irreducible kernel from which everything else flows. Everything. Then the question is why nature appears quantized as simply a consequence of the fact that information is itself quantized by necessity. It might even be fair to observe that the concept of information is fundamental, is very old knowledge of humanity, information being fundamental, as in logos. Witness, for example, the beginning of the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word. Lord bless Anton Zeilinger. Why don't I just read a little bit of the essay, or maybe the whole thing? We'll just see. Quantum world is full of paradoxes, of which the most well-known is Schrodinger's cat. There have been a number of attempts in history of quantum physics to somehow bypass the conceptual problems of quantum physics. Witness, for example, Einstein's position, not the least because all attempts have turned out not to be very fruitful. The only productive approach is to accept quantum phenomenon and ask what the message of the quantum really is. John Archibald Wheeler has formulated this in his far-reaching questions. It turns out that very naturally the referent of quantum physics is not reality per se. As Niels Bohr said, it is what can be said about the world. Or in modern words, it is information. Thus, if information is the most fundamental notion in quantum physics, a very natural understanding of phenomenon like quantum decoherence or quantum teleportation emerges, and quantum entanglement is nothing else than the property of subsystems of a composed quantum system to carry information jointly, independent of space and time, and the randomness of individual quantum events is a consequence of the finiteness of information. The quantum is then a reflection of the fact that all we can do is make statements about the world expressed in a discrete number of bits. The universe is participatory, at least in the sense that the experimentalist, by choosing the measurement apparatus, defines out a set of mutually complementary observables, which possible property of a system can manifest itself as reality, and the randomness of individual events stems from the finiteness of information. A number of experiments will be reviewed underlining these views. This will include an entangled photon delayed choice experiment, where the decision whether a photon that has passed a double slit did this as a particle or a wave is delayed not only until the time after its passage through the double slit assembly, but even after it has already been registered. Thus, while the observed facts, i.e. the events registered by detectors, are not changed, our physical picture changes depending on our choice of what to measure. Another experiment discussed is the observation of the quantum interference of fullerenes, which are so hot that they are not at all decoupled from the environment. The reason why interference is still observed is due to the fact that the photons emitted by the fullerenes do not carry path information into the environment. The criterion for observation of interference is simply whether or not path information is available anywhere in the universe, independent of whether or not an observer cares to read that information out. Finally, an experiment on the teleportation of an entangled photon demonstrates that the decision whether or not two photons are entangled or not, again, can be made at a time long after these photons have already been observed. More precisely, the quantum state we assign two photons for a time period before they have been registered depends on our future choice, whether or not we then implement the Bell state measurement these two photons are entangled with. This experiment lends support to the idea that the quantum state is just a representation of our knowledge, and that this knowledge changes when an observation is made. Thus, the reduction of the wave packet is just a reflection of the fact that the representation of our information has to change whenever the information itself changes as a consequence of an observation. In conclusion, it may very well be said that information is the irreducible kernel from which everything else flows. Then the question why nature appears quantized is simply a consequence of the fact that information itself is quantized by necessity. It might even be fair to observe that the concept that information is fundamental is very old knowledge of humanity. Witness, for example, the beginning of Gospel according to John. In the beginning was the Word. And so writes Anton Zeilinger, Nobel Prize winner 2022, quoting the Gospel of John. I've tried to tell people, and it just floats over, biologists said, when it comes to universal questions, they so many of them just don't think much outside of their own field. Whereas if one studies physics, the question of ultimate reality just it's inevitable that it starts to pop up. And so let me read one influential book is this book, Measurements in Time Reversal and Objective Quantum Theory. And I've read this before. Page 98. By the way, F.J. Belinfante, his name was referenced in my graduate level statistical mechanics by Pathry and Beal. Statistical mechanics and thermodynamics was the course. F.J. Belinfante is a very respected physicist. And here he says, section 3.7, quantum theory and God. People are accustomed to assume that only persons can decide what to do. In this sense, some personality may be ascribed even to animals. Therefore, if I get the impression that nature itself makes the decisive choice what possibility to realize, where quantum theory says that more than one outcome is possible, then I am ascribing personality to nature, that is, to something that is always everywhere. Omnipresent, eternal personality, which is omnipotent in taking the decisions that are left undetermined by physical law, is exactly what in the language of religion is called God. We thus see how quantum theory requires the existence of God. Of course, it does not ascribe to God defined in this way any of the specific additional qualities that the various existing religious doctrines ascribe to God. Acceptance of such doctrines is a matter of belief and faith. So, Zeilinger quoted that passage in John that identifies Jesus Christ as God. Whether he's a Christian or not, he was at least acquainted with this, and his experiments in quantum theory kind of told him, this is amazing because this seems to have been ancient knowledge, that the Logos, Jesus Christ, the Word, the eternal, is everything else flows from him. And Zeilinger is saying everything flows from information. And this may really seem strange to people that are accustomed to classical physics, and quantum is just really weird. Oh, Patrick, greetings. Long time, brother. So let me read something from the prestigious scientific journal Nature. This was an essay, 2005, called The Mental Universe. It was written by a professor at my alma mater, Johns Hopkins University, Richard Conn Henry. I passed by near his office one day. I never met him personally. But this is going to echo a lot of what Zeilinger said and what F.J. Belinfante and others have said. The quantum world is very, very strange. There is a book that tries to extend what Frank Tipler, who I said was an atheist turned Christian. He was a student of John Archibald Wheeler, who was the supervisor of several Nobel Prize winners, or at least one of them, maybe a couple. There is this book, Ultimate Observer. This one is by Frank Richmond. It really is a summary of kind of a simplified look at work by people like Frank Tipler and other quantum physicists. The Ultimate Observer, Quantum Physics and God. The new atheists tell us that science has disproven the existence of an active creator, the type of God described in the Bible. They claim theories have no place for such a being, but those theories have been specifically developed in such a way as to eliminate any place for him. Many believers through the years have tried to make their God conform to the theories of modern science, but all suffer from the same conceptual flaw. They accept those theories as facts. The existence of God may not conform to currently accepted theories, but there is no conflict at all with the actual results of scientific experiments. In fact, if we look at our universe from the correct perspective, we can explain these results in the simplest and most direct manner possible. And we can find an understanding of the Bible and our place in God's plans that is more profound than we've ever had before. And I'm just going to skip this. This goes on to tie quantum physics to the existence of God. But let me just briefly say, I don't think anyone is going to get an ultimate proof, because finite beings trying to extrapolate all the way out to the infinite, that's just not, I don't think it's just feasible. There's always a kernel of faith wherever you go. But I think some beliefs are more reasonable than others. I certainly think naturalistic abiogenesis is just ridiculous at this point. James Tour is just bludgeoning that. Not far behind is eukaryotic evolution and the evolution of major protein families. I got to refute some dumb things I heard in a discussion that I've since deleted. It was kind of disgusting, and that individual has been banned from my channels. He said, well, it's 100% fact we exist. Therefore, he was implying it's 100% probable. I said, no, and I had to argue with him. The guy was dumb as a brick, and I said, no, that's not the way it works, sir. There are things that are far from expectation. If you happened upon a 500 fair coins lying on the floor and they're all heads, you'll say it's 100% right that it's all heads, but it doesn't make it that this was a highly probable event. I mean, the guy's logic was just pathetic, and I called him out on it. And the state of life it's far from natural expectation. The chemistry that makes up life to have emerged from a primordial state is not the expected outcome. The level of integration and then the characteristics of it are just so far from expectation, starting with like the Gibbs energy expectation based on Gibbs free energy, etc. So if quantum theory says, if one interpretation, there are many interpretations, but if one of them suggests that there's a God, then it's on the table that it's a possibility. How improbable is something? How far from expectation? How many sigmas from the mean, so to speak, of expectation, which is the more proper form of improbability? How far does, how big of a statistical miracle does something have to be before one entertains the possibility that there's a God and a God did it? So the importance of all this quantum mechanics, it's not opening the possibility that there's a God. It could be a legitimate agency. And then, of course, these not too very thoughtful people say, well, what's the mechanism? I'm just like, don't you get it? There could be a point where what causes something will forever be beyond our ability to comprehend. I totally get it that you'll believe things you understand and control. But something like the origin of the universe, do you really think, honestly, that you're going to have the capacity to figure out with your finite mind in your finite life how the universe came to be, and you're only going to believe it if you can understand it? It could be well out of your comprehension, but there might be some basic things that you can assume. Whatever was the source of the universe was pretty powerful. If you see fine tuning that allows things like atoms, because most universes would not have atoms, it's like, well, maybe it's a pretty wise creator. And then you look at life, it's like, yeah, whatever created it was a spectacular statistical miracle. It was pretty wise. What does that look like? At what point do you begin to think this is evidence of God, albeit is not a direct confirmation, but it's certainly better than the garbage of abiogenesis theory and evolutionary theory that are speculations that do not agree with chemistry or physics anyway, but they pretend it does. That's illegitimate. It's wrong. So let's go to the mental universe. The only reality is mind and observations, but observations are not of things. To see the universe as it really is, we must abandon our tendency to conceptualize observations as things. Prestigious scientific journal Nature, July 6, 2005. Historically, we have looked to our religious leaders to understand the meaning of our lives, the nature of our world. With Galileo Galilei, this changed. In establishing that the earth goes around the sun, Galileo not only succeeded in believing the unbelievable himself, but also convinced almost everyone else to do the same. This was a stunning accomplishment in physics outreach, and with subsequent work of Isaac Newton, physics joined religion in seeking to explain our place in the universe. The more recent physics revolution of the past 80 years has yet to transform general public understanding in a similar way, and yet a correct understanding of physics was accessible even to Pythagoras. According to Pythagoras, number is all things, and numbers are mental, not mechanical. Likewise, Newton called light particles, knowing the concept to be an effective theory, useful, not true. As noted by Newton's biographer Richard Westphal, the ultimate cause of atheism, Newton asserted, is the notion of bodies having, as it were, a complete, absolute, and independent reality in themselves. Newton knew of Newton's rings and was untroubled by what it's shallowly called wave-particle duality. Yes, even prior to quantum mechanics, Newton was aware of this. It's amazing. In 1925, discovery of quantum mechanics solved the problem of the universe's nature. Bright physicists were again led to believe the unbelievable, this time that the universe is mental. According to Sir James Jeans, the stream of knowledge is heading towards a non mechanical reality. The universe begins to look more like a great thought than a great machine. Mind no longer appears to be an accidental intruder into the realm of matter. We ought rather to hail it as the creator and governor of the realm of matter. Why don't I read that again? Mind no longer appears to be an accidental intruder into the realm of matter. We ought rather hail it as the creator and governor of the realm of matter. But physicists have not yet followed Galileo's example and convinced everyone of the wonders of quantum mechanics. As Sir Arthur Eddington explained, it is difficult for the matter-of-fact physicist to accept the view that the substratum of everything is of mental character. In his play Copenhagen, which brings quantum mechanics to a wider audience, Michael Frayn gives these word to Niels Bohr. We discover that the universe exists only through the understanding lodged inside the human head. Bohr's wife replies, "This man you put at the center of the universe, is it you or is it Heisenberg?" This is what sticks in the craw of Eddington's matter-of-fact physicists. Discussing the play, John H. Marburger III, President George Bush's science advisor, observed that in the Copenhagen interpretation of microscopic nature, there are neither waves nor particles, but then frames his remarks in terms of a non-existent underlying stuff. He points out that it is not true that matter sometimes behaves like a wave and sometimes like a particle. The wave is not in the underlying stuff. It is the spatial pattern of detector clicks. We cannot help but think the clicks are caused by little localized pieces of stuff that we might as well call particles. This is where the particle language comes from. It does not come from the underlying stuff, but from our psychological predisposition to associate localized phenomenon with particles. In place of underlying stuff, there have been serious attempts to preserve a material world, but they produce no new physics and serve only to preserve an illusion. Scientists have sadly left it to non-physicist Frayn to note the emperor's lack of clothes. It seems to me that the view which Murray Gell-Mann favors, and which involves what he calls alternative histories or narratives, is precisely as anthropocentric as Bohr's, since histories and narratives are not freestanding elements of the universe, but human constructs, as subjective and as restricted in their viewpoint as the act of observation. Physicists shy from the truth because the truth is so alien to everyday physics. A common way to evade the mental universe is to invoke decoherence, the notion that the physical environment is sufficient to create reality, independent of the human mind. Yet the idea that any irreversible act of amplification is necessary to collapse the wave function is known to be wrong. Yet, let me read that again. Yet the idea that any irreversible act of amplification is necessary to collapse the wave function is known to be wrong. In Renninger-type experiments, the wave function is collapsed simply by your human mind seeing nothing. The universe is entirely mental. In the 10th century, Ibn al-Haytham initiated the view that light proceeds from a source, enters the eye, and is perceived. This picture is incorrect, but is still what most people think occurs, including, unless pressed, most physicists. To come to terms with the universe, we must abandon such views. The world is quantum mechanical. We must learn to perceive it as such. One benefit of switching humanity to a correct perception of the world is the resulting joy of discovering the mental nature of the universe. We have no idea what this mental nature implies, but the great thing is, it is true. Beyond the acquisition of this perception, physics can no longer help us. You may descend into solipsism, expanded deism, or something else if you can justify it. Just don't ask physics for help. There is another benefit of seeing the world as quantum mechanical. Someone who has learned to accept that nothing exists but observations is far ahead of peers who stumble through physics hoping to find out what things are. If we can pull a Galileo and get people believing the truth, they will find physics is a breeze. The universe is immaterial, mental and spiritual. Live and enjoy. Now, this is granted a very confusing essay to those who are not initiated in quantum mechanics. And Zeilinger, in Zeilinger's essay, he referenced a very interesting experiment. It's called the double slit delayed choice. And this has relevance to the existence of God and mind independent reality. I mean, reality, material independent reality. And, I just get so annoyed with these people. It's like, how do you know that? How do you measure it? It's like, dude, do you not know what an inference is? Are you not willing to entertain this? I mean, they're just so limited. It's like, okay, just go back to your abiogenesis and evolutionary theory. It doesn't work anyway, even with accepted, textbook laws of physics, chemistry, and statistics. But this is a very interesting experiment, and I'm going to highlight it right here. A number of experiments will be reviewed underlying these views. This will include an entangled photon delayed choice experiment where the decision whether a photon is past the double slit, did this as a particle or wave, is delayed not only until a time of passage through the double slit assembly, but even after it has already been registered. Let me see. There is something here I want to cover. Future. Okay. Quantum state we assign to two photons for a time period before they have been registered depends on our future choice. Future choice. This means that the future affects the past. That is so bizarre. Now, I briefly, very passingly worked in a nanomolecular systems group. That was an active concern whether the choice of the end users using a computer might affect the quantum state and the computation of the computer. I don't know how much this may affect quantum computing, but it's kind of, the weirdness of quantum mechanics is you can, at the micro level, you can invoke the future affects the past. Now you can't extend it, we humans cannot extend it much beyond kind of the nanoparticle realm. But this has implications. If we humans are able to influence the past based on our decisions in the present, or someone's decision in the future is affecting our existence in the present, this is very bizarre. And it begins to suggest that there is some ultimate mental consciousness in the future that is drawing reality toward himself by the way that he is choosing. As I said, reading from this quantum mechanics book, let me read it. People are accustomed to assume that only persons can decide what to do. Therefore, I get the impression that nature itself makes the decisive choice what possibility to realize. Where quantum theory says that more than one outcome is possible, then I'm ascribing personality to nature, that is something that is always everywhere. Omnipresent, eternal personality, which is omnipotent in taking the decisions that are left undetermined by physical law, is exactly what in the language of religion is called God. We thus see how quantum theory requires the existence of God. So if you want to observe a photon as a particle, it will behave. Your decision to observe it in the present will affect its behavior in the past. Now, how this can be all reconciled is just, I don't think anyone's completely figured that out. But if you choose to observe its property as a wave, it will behave like a wave. And this essay by Zeilinger, he's talking about this double slit delayed choice experiment here. We might even be able to do this at galactic level, where Wheeler said, okay, the way we choose to observe a photon that may have been emitted billions of years ago, if one believes in an old universe, that's fair, just as a hypothesis, just as a thought experiment, that we are affecting the way that that photon is behaving. And that will have just all sorts of effects. Everything's kind of entangled, and it somehow works. And this has led to the conclusion there could be some study of quantum mechanics has suggested there's a non-material reality called consciousness. There's a conscious mental state that seems to transcend. So the idea of a soul that is decoupled even from, a brain, and that's been postulated. And the ultimate non-material reality being God, who's able to control everything. So, that's kind of where I'm at. I mean, as a student of physics, when you start hearing people of high caliber start to entertain thoughts of a divine creator that has all these capabilities that theology has described, you're just like, well, maybe it is real. And then when you see the miracle of life and the miracle of the emergence of complexity that defies abiogenesis and evolution, begin to think, and then you have fine tuning in the universe on so many levels. I mean, how much of a statistical miracle does one have to observe before one concludes it's a miracle? And if there is a miracle, there must be a miracle maker. So let me just close out again. Again, congratulations to Anton Zeilinger. I knew he was a great researcher. It doesn't surprise me that he won the Nobel Prize in Physics. If you can do stuff like quantum teleportation, I think this is really cool. But let me read that and then I'll close out. Thank you all for everyone who's visited. In conclusion, it may very well be said that information is the irreducible kernel from which everything else flows. Then the question why nature appears quantized is simply a consequence of the fact that information itself is quantized by necessity. It might even be fair to observe that the concept that information is fundamental is very old knowledge of humanity. Witness, for example, the beginning of Gospel according to John. In the beginning was the Word. And with that, I'll close. Take care and God bless you. I may be doing a stream a little later on. I know it's kind of late on my academic channel, not this channel. Look in the video description. Look for the academic channel, Evidence Reasons Academy. I'm, maybe in about half an hour or so, I might start a stream there on Maxwell's equations, the derivation of the wave equation, and the D'Alembert. Yeah, it's going to be a nerd torture session, guys. But anyway, glory and honor to our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, who is the Logos, who is the Creator, who is the information, to quote Zeilinger's words, from which everything else proceeds. Take care, God bless you, and thank you for joining me this evening.